Anthony, yeah.
Well, I think that brings up an important point about video number one, which I think maybe all of us are really quite taken with. Um, the it's very clear about where you want to go and what you're laying out. I think, though, it's very clear for a certain age or experience level of listener. Whereas if we're trying to hook or trying to provide an opportunity to hook newcomers to the hobby, there's going to be a lot of it that's, like you just said, age related. Like the examples used can completely go over the head of the listener or things like that. But what I was listening for this third time going through the series
Oh my God,
was,
for your sins. Right.
oh no, it's great. But what I was listening for was, I'm the newcomer, I've never played before, or whatever, and I'm looking for the simple statement that tells me why I'm listening to this series. Like,
Right.
I've been asking questions on forum. Someone says, "Hey, you got to listen to this phenomenology talk by this guy," and then I'm listening, and I don't understand much of what's being said because I don't have that experience, and I tune out, I stop listening, and I then have to go and recreate the wheel myself until I have enough experience to understand the talk. So I'm wondering what could be that statement as the newcomer that makes me want to push through to the end, if
Helma
you know what I
is
mean.
on this one.
Well, I just wanted to protest a little bit. The thing is that I probably watched the series in a different way than everybody else because I watched it more as a lecture, not a seminar. And it works pretty well as a lecture. Granted, I grew up in a household with a linguist, so I'm quite used to abstract language. So I can't speak for somebody who isn't. But for me, it was quite easy to follow. Uh, Now, when I watched it the second time, I even picked up a little bit of other details. I actually found the Finding D&D series much more difficult to comprehend than this one. I still haven't grappled with that one in a way that I understand what's going on.
Well, perhaps you and me and the rest of us, as far as that topic is concerned. Um, but one thing I wanted to point out is that I will really want to emphasize that the phenomenology series, it if we were talking about living things, and this is something that I did as a biology professor for many years, which was not to start by throwing. In fact, I even joked with my students. I'd walked in and say, "Hey, you're sitting here in biology class, and you're expecting me to put up that big circle bag full of fluid and things floating in it and tell you that one of them's a mitochondria, right?" And they were all like, "Yes." And I was like, "Well, guess what? I'm not doing this today. I'll hit you with mitochondria a couple of days from now. But first, I want to tell you what we're talking about. What on earth are we talking about that anybody would care?" And they all kind of looked at me suspiciously and were like, "Yeah, right. You can't do that. You're going to bore us with mitochondria anyway, aren't you?" Right. And so that's what I'm saying here is when we look at phenomenology, it's like we're jumping to step two, right? The first video series is going to be about play, how it feels, what it's like to do it. And hopefully, right there, anybody would not only spot themselves in it somewhere, or they'll spot something in it that they say, "Ooh, I could do that. A human could do that. I get that. A human can do that." Right. And so phenomenology, I almost want to say, is should come with a warning label or something that says, "Be careful now. This is like when we start talking about mitochondria. This is when we start talking about, adenosine triphosphate. This is when we start talking about energy cycles and loss in the body and metabolism and stuff like that." And that's where every biology major changes their major as soon as they really encounter that stuff, because who wants that shit? And so I don't know. I'm going to have to frame it in a way that says, all right, now we're stepping in, and you need to remember we're talking about play, and you were cool with play, right, Claudio?
Um, th- this brings another point that I think is really important. This is something that you've been talking about basically since you started talking about RPGs. And I don't know if you are a musician or not, but sometimes either you're a musician or you definitely listen to a lot of music, but you definitely talk sometimes like a musician. So I don't know if you are or not, but
I have an extensive
you
background in
often
playing music, not for a long time, but I do have a very extensive background in it. For an evolutionary
that makes sense.
biologist who actually, like did a whole bunch of evolutionary biology, just so you
Yeah.
know, I have an extensive history in both music and in theater, and sometimes both at the same time.
So
But that's all long, long
you often
ago, and in another country, and nobody who will anybody who will tell you, about it is probably dead. So, yeah.
Well, so you often compare because you do this point about the author audience
Mm-hmm.
relationship, and that in RPGs they are one and the same. And then this point you don't make in the video, but I know you've made in the past that role playing is very similar to jamming, especially jazz jamming, but in general jamming. And I've thought about it and I really think that's probably the best real world example that you can give uh, to a person that maybe hasn't thought about role playing this way. That it to explain like the analogy is so perfect. It's just like it is the same. Jamming and role playing have that same particular property of the merging of audience and authorship, and it does result in what you say, the particular vividness of experience. And it's just something so I think it should be even stressed more, this analogy with music, because
I'm
I don't
thinking
know if
that
it
belongs in the play video in a constructive way. But I'm interested in what Greg has to say about that, because he and I did that dialogue about it.
Yeah, but I don't know. So yeah, it's true. In fact, I discovered that the play by I was reading this book on the sociology of jazz improvisation sessions, and I read this interview of Ron somewhere, and I didn't know him, and that's how I took contact. Like I mailed him and I say, yeah, you should read this book, and the answer was, no, we should talk about this book. We talked about. So I think it's true. I think there are also really concepts, sociological concepts that analyze jazz sessions that are really, really helpful for the table, and we should continue this conversation.
Okay, we can definitely follow up on that, and I can make use of it for the right presentation part. Sean, you look like you're in.
Two quick things. One about back rules. And I think this is something that should be talked about, but others might not. When we were talking about rules, making sure you're playing with the quote unquote right set of rules or the same set of rules, that the social structure that you're in right now here at this table is or can be or might be or probably is part of the rules as well. How the 5 or 4 or 2 of you approach game X is going to be fundamentally different, even if you're playing the same game. Because playing, you could play the bass line of a song with the same instrument, but it's going to be different depending on the musicians who are with you and the musician who's playing the instrument. The second thing is, and this was sort of a revelation to me in part 3, where you talk about how characters are changing constantly. And I think that is, for me, something of a revelation, because I don't think we spend a lot of time on the rules for characters, but I don't know how much time we spend talking about the characters as these sort of living documents that are changing moment to moment within a game. And I think that's something that could hook a lot of people, for one, but it's something that's worth talking about.
For me, that is so critical to the play video, because one of my favorite artifacts that I've got from role playing is actually my play of Champions during the late '80s, and it's remarkable. The sheets are placed in reverse order, and so I have all this stuff that the players used. And so, for example, the original character sheet and some notes that the player provided are at the bottom. And then that character sheet has clearly been, vigorously used because of all of the erasure and all of the rewriting on top of it and all of the stuff. And the picture is kind of primitive looking, and you can see that stuff got added to the picture. And then on top of that are handouts that I had provided, and you can actually see notes in the margins of the handouts that people made during play. And then on top of that is a later character sheet. The old character sheet is tissue fine by this point, and completely useless for physical use in play. So they've got another character sheet, wrote the character as they stand at the moment, and then carry on. And then on top of that are handouts and so forth. So we're talking a nice, thick, set. And Helma is probably recognizing this from the RuneQuest game, right? The very same kind of archaeological, dig that you've got. And to look at it and to actually be, it's got that, how it is with things like this. Touching it, smelling it, handling it triggers sense memories, and you definitely say, that's how I looked at the character at that time. I remember that, and then this happened and stuff like that. And so I've always been trying to generate an enthusiasm for that aspect of play, right? In people, which became, in the days of kind of quickie India one shots, very difficult to get across. So I can name a number of games which have tried to do this more formally, but I agree, something about that is a very big deal. Helma, were you?
Zach and Ross wanted to say something.
Oh, okay. So Zach first, I guess.
Anthony can follow up and tell me if this is a fair adjacent or summary of what he was saying, but it struck me that, as enamored as you said as we are of part one, the major thing that seemed to me to be missing was sort of any introduction at all to what we're talking about. And I know that going in, we all know that going into it, but for the viewer, that we are talking about this activity, even something simple like, many people wonder what is actually going on under the hood of role-playing games, or whatever, however you want to phrase it. So the way I wonder is, who is your target audience for this video? That would be my sort of standard marketing prompt question, and that might be helpful for honing how you pitch it, especially the first part.
Okay. Yeah, I got you. Ross, what was yours?
I'm kind of going to disagree with Zach. I got a very strong sense of what the video thing is about, and it's about this as an art form with audience and authors as the same people, and that's kind of the key central thing up there at the front. And I kind of think that's sort of clear enough. Maybe what I'm interested in, and that maybe isn't then called out as much further down, is the sort of unique features that brings to this, as opposed to other narrative or other art forms. Maybe there's more to dig into in that sort of space, without getting down into the weeds of individual rule sets and what those sort of determine about.
So easy. As soon as you want to talk concretely, then you end up with an example, and then you have to end up qualifying that example 8 different ways.
Yeah.